Hello. On behalf of the Department of English and Comparative Literature, I would like to welcome you to today's lecture. I'm delighted to introduce today's guest of the Department of English and Comparative Literature, award-winning novelist Leila Aboulela. Leila Aboulela is a Sudanese-Egyptian novelist whose work, written in English, has received critical acclaim and a high profile for its distinctive exploration of identity, migration, and Islamic spirituality. Early in her career, Aboulela won the Caine Prize for African writing. She is the author of 4 novels. Her most recent novel is The Kindness of Enemies. The Translator, a New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year, Minaret and Lyrics Alley were all long-listed to the Orange Prize. Lyrics Alley was fiction winner of the Scottish Book Awards and was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize. Her collection of short stories, Colored Lights, was shortlisted for the MacMillan Silver PEN Award, and several of her plays were broadcast by BBC Radio. Abouleila's work has been translated into 15 languages, including Arabic. She grew up in Khartoum and now lives in Aberdeen. Highlighting the challenges facing Muslims in Europe and telling the stories of flawed, complex characters who struggle to make choices using Muslim logic, Abouleila's work explores significant political issues. The move in her mid-20s from Sudan to Scotland, as well as the Scottish literary landscape, are a major influence on her work. Abouleila's works have been included in cultural educational programs supported by the British Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities in the US. I wish to thank our department chair, Dr. Stephen Nimes, Dr. Faria Razoul for inviting Leila Aboulela, department colleagues, and my colleagues Aula Shanab and Umayya Ali for all their hard work in preparing for the events, and fellows in the English and Comparative Literature Department for their assistance. We have Leila Abouleila's books on sale outside, and we will have a book signing after the lecture. We're delighted to have Leila Aboulela with us today, so please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faye, for this again warm welcome, and many thanks for my hosts for inviting me here to this lovely campus, which I've fallen in love with. I think it's very nice, and I'm envious of all you students who come here every day. The title of the talk is Through the Eyes of Others, Developing Empathy by Reading Fiction. And an alternative title, which I was thinking of using, was I Know How You Feel. Empathy being the ability to relate and understand the position of others. When we read, we see the world through the eyes of the characters that we're reading about. And if these characters are very different than us, then we are seeing a very different world indeed. I grew up in Sudan, and I moved to Scotland in my mid-20s. In Sudan, I went to an English language school, and I read a lot of English and American fiction. When I immigrated in my mid-20s to Scotland, I found that all this reading helped me to understand the people around me. They, however, knew very little about me or the part of the world I came from. This made me feel the need to share with them the things that made up my identity, my mixed Egyptian and Sudanese heritage, and my religion, Islam. I will talk to you today about my own personal journey as a writer. I will also talk about literature as a way of bridging distance between people of different cultures and ethnicities. I also have some examples of comments that readers have made about my work. Practically speaking, we will not, in our course of life, come into contact with every single person who is different than us. We will certainly come into contact with many, but not all. And reading literature offers this opportunity. Practically speaking, we will not go through every possible human experience. Many experiences are certainly universal, but not all. And reading literature is a way of gaining insight to places, feelings, and experiences that realistically we cannot have access to. Harmony and cooperation between people who are culturally different is not only a good thing, but a necessary thing. We cannot do without it. The way the world today is interconnected, the mobility of people, our dependence on each other, makes it necessary for us to be open-minded and flexible. To be insular and parochial in this day and age is to be on the wrong side of history. The writer, Neil Gaiman, says that fiction builds empathy. He says, prose fiction is something you build up from 26 letters and a handful of punctuation marks, and you alone, using your imagination, create a world and people it and look out through other eyes. You get to feel things, visit places in the world you would never otherwise know. You learn that everyone else out there is a me as well. You're being someone else, and when you return to your own world, you're going to be slightly changed. Empathy is a tool for building people into groups, for allowing us to function as more than self-obsessed individuals. I grew up in Sudan, a country made up of different tribes and ethnicities. In North Sudan, the people are Arab or Nubians. They are Muslims and they speak Arabic. In South Sudan, the tribes speak African languages, and most of them are Christians. The Sudan I grew up in was a united Sudan. It was one country, but most of the power was in the hand of the northerners. Belonging to the majority, I grew up in privileged circumstances in the capital Khartoum, and I witnessed around me the casual racism and disregard for the darker-skinned Christian Southerners. I did not see them in positions of authority, nor was their culture represented faithfully on national TV or in the school syllabus. Years later, when I came to live in Britain, I found suddenly that the tables had turned. I was now on the other side of the divide. I was the one who was dark-skinned, and as a Muslim belonging to a minority, often seen as problematic and insular. This was a big shift in perspective and a lesson for me. At one time and in a certain place, I was in the majority. Now I'm part of a minority. My writing voice sprang up from change in circumstances and from my new position on the margins of British society. When I learned to dig into my subconscious mind for childhood memories to use in my writing, I remembered not only the positive things about Sudan that I missed, but also things I didn't want to remember. I remembered the quiet southern Sudanese who moved as if they were in the shadows, always treated by us, the northerners, as if they did not belong, always treated as if they were not Sudanese enough. In 2011, after a bloody and brutal civil war, the overwhelming majority of southern Sudanese voted for independence from the north. I see this as a failure of the north to respect the equality and aspiration of the south. And what is relevant to the subject of this talk, the division of the country was the culmination of years in which there was little or no empathy from the north to the south. You may know already the reasons for the split between North and South Sudan, not only the policy of separate development which was established during British colonial times, but also the failure of the government in Khartoum to develop the South and spend all the revenue in its infrastructure. Added to it was a distasteful propaganda campaign against Southerners, and to top it all, the insistence by the North that the only identity Sudan could have was an Islamic Arab one. This alienated the largely Christian South and led to a bitter and detrimental divorce, a divorce which turned out to be economically and humanly catastrophic to both sides. When I visit Sudan now, I find a very different country than the one I had left in the 1980s. Its physical borders are no longer the same. There is now Sudan, meaning North Sudan, although the North is omitted from the title, and that has its capital in Khartoum. And then there is South Sudan with Juba as its capital. South Sudan gained its independence in 2011 after a referendum in which more than 95% voted for separation from the North. I wonder if there had been empathy between the people of North and South Sudan, would there have been a civil war? If there was empathy between the Muslim North and the Christian South, would they have divorced so bitterly as they did in 2011? Growing up in the North, there was nothing in the school syllabus that taught me about the culture or people of the South. State television did nothing to promote South Sudanese music, dance, or traditions. As an adult, I was thrilled when I read a short story by the South Sudanese writer David Lekudu, set in Khartoum in the fasting month of Ramadan. The story follows a day in the life of a southern Sudanese young man, a Christian who is not observing the fast. For me, it was a fascinating perspective, a completely different way of seeing my familiar city. It opened my eyes to a very different experience and a very different way of life. The writer, Stella Gaetano, is a southern Sudanese who has lived all her life in the north. She writes in Arabic remarkable stories about the poor who live in shanty towns and who struggle to make a living. Her stories opened my eyes to another view of my city, a completely different way of life than my own. I wish I had read such stories when I was younger, and I wish that all children in the north had grown up reading literature from South Sudan. But is harmony easy between people of different cultures? It is well, and it's easy to say that we should all have goodwill and peaceful coexistence is necessary, and that reading literature promotes empathy, but how easily can it be achieved? Imagine that you're sitting in a train that you know will eventually reach a particular destination, let's say Alexandria. You have written proof in your hand, which is your ticket. There is someone else traveling with you in the same compartment. Your traveling companion is friendly, you strike up a conversation, and suddenly in mid-flow you realize that this person next to you doesn't know that the train is heading towards Alexandria. In fact, they believe that this train ride is going somewhere else, to a place you have never heard of, or to a place in a completely different direction than Alexandria. Or, and that might be even more disturbing, your traveling companion believes that the train journey is going to go on and on and on forever. You show them your ticket as proof, but they cast doubt on its validity. This situation is deeply unsettling. It sounds like a nightmare, and the kind of nightmares that we have when we are going through a phase of anxiety. But however, it is a situation that could induce panic, and a frightened person can do foolish things. A frightened person can be dangerous. But this is not a nightmare, really. This is the truth. This is what life is like, that we are traveling with people who have different destinations, or who believe that they are heading to a completely different place. So if you two passengers insist on your differences, you will come to blows and maybe even derail the train. The solution for a safe and harmonious journey is to focus on what you share rather than how you differ. It is best to talk to your traveling companion about what you have in common, what won't bring you to blows. Talk about the scenery that the train is passing. Talk about the facilities that you're getting on board, even gossip about the other passengers. Talk about anything except the destination or the fact that you disagree about the destination. But still, the shock will be there, and the uncertainty. Is the train ride going to go on forever? Or will it end where your traveling document says it will end? Or are you two people sharing a journey with separate destinations? These questions can never have a single answer. They might remain deeply philosophical. Your convictions affect how you behave and how you see yourself. They might even determine who you really are in your deepest self. But these different destinations must not be substituted for the important reality that you two are sharing the same small, precious, precarious moving space. You two are together, whether you like it or not. For the journey to be peaceful and enjoyable, there has to be restraint, there has to be respect and courtesy. It would have helped before boarding the train to know that you will find traveling companions who differ in the destination they are heading to. It goes without saying, then, that it is essential for children and young people to know that there are people in the world who see it differently than they and their parents do, who have different beliefs and values. And these different people might not necessarily live on the other side of the planet. They are here, right here, sharing the same schools, supermarkets, and streets. Because practically speaking, children and adults too might not be able to come into enough contact with people of diverse backgrounds. Reading literature offers this opportunity. Mallory Blackman, a successful children's author of the series Noughts and Crosses, and until recently the Children's Laureate in the UK, said in an interview, "Books allow you to see the world through the eyes of others. Reading is an exercise in empathy, an exercise in walking in someone else's shoes for a while." Speaking about her own reading as a child, she said, "I loved seeing the world through other cultures, other religions, other colors." Mallory Blackman's opinion is backed by science. A Cambridge University professor of education found that reading fiction provides an excellent training for young people in developing and practicing empathy and theory of mind. That is, understanding of how other people feel and think. Empathy is increasingly being recognized as a core life skill and the bedrock for sound relationships. Recently, there was an article in the Washington Post entitled, Does reading fiction make you a better person? The article reports a research made in the New School and published in Science magazine, arguing that literary fiction, as opposed to nonfiction or popular genre like science fiction, temporarily enhance a skill known as theory of mind, which is the ability to imagine what might be going on in someone else's head. So this research answers the question that you might be thinking, well, I don't really want to read, reading is hard, I like watching films instead. So this research then says that that it is the process of imagining the scenes while reading which develops the skill of empathy. And it highlights literary fiction, meaning fiction which is nuanced, which is layered, which is deep, as opposed to popular genres like science fiction and thrillers. Of course, not all science fiction and thrillers are poor or shallow. There are very good science fiction and thrillers that deserve being classified as literary fiction. Another study in the American Psychological Association's journey, Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts, found that the process of imagining scenes while reading led to an increase in empathy and pro-social behavior. Okay. So that is the point then. It is actually that you're reading and you're imagining the scenes. You're letting your imagination fill in the gaps of the reading, and that this is what is building up the empathy. So that's why watching films is not going to really do it to some extent. As a child, my love of reading started at the Khartoum American School. It was a small school that taught the American syllabus and catered for the children of the American embassy staff and the employees of American companies, mostly Chevron. And it was there that I first, fell in love with reading, because I walked into the library and I looked at the books and I wanted to take the books home. And library day became my favorite of the week. And even at this young age, I noticed, of course, the cultural differences in the material I was reading, and I'm sure you do too, because Arab, African, and Arab young people who grow up reading British and American novels, they're reading about characters who have different names than themselves. These characters have they look different, they might look different, they inhabit a sensory world different than theirs in terms of weather, food, games, and cultures. And of course, also, if you're reading about someone from a different religion, you're also noticing the difference. I mean, one of the things I remember is how my favorite characters were always eating eggs and bacon. And I always used to think when I read that they're eating eggs and basturma, because that's how I was thinking about it when I was reading, because I couldn't imagine bacon. I don't know bacon. So it's as a writer, of course, when you grow up reading in English and reading things that you cannot relate to, you then want to make your own literature which reflects your own culture as well. I said earlier that I would speak about my journey as a writer. I didn't become a writer until I left Sudan, and that was what gave me the material and the subject matter I needed. When my husband and I first settled in Scotland, we were not sure when we would return to Sudan, or if indeed we would never go back, remaining as immigrants in the UK or moving on to a second foreign country. This uncertainty gave me a sense of dislocation. There was homesickness to deal with, as well as cultural confusion and awkwardness of being an Arab and a Muslim in the Europe of the 1990s. Exile, by definition, is a life one has not been prepared for. It is a removal from the familiar. It is the saddest of fates, as Edward Said described it. Looking back, this experience seems to have been the catalyst that awoke in me a dormant ability to write. Had I continued to live in Sudan, this creativity might have slept forever. The ending of one kind of life and the beginning of another was dramatic enough to make me pause and reflect. The gulf of difference between Khartoum and Scotland compelled me to comment, to compare, to notice absences and observe additions. The end of my life in Khartoum demanded an elegy, and it was in fiction that I found the language to express my anxieties, my misgivings, and my reactions to all that was new and surprising. At first, I was simply gripped by a compulsive need to express myself. Words were whizzing through my head all the time. The mechanics of constructing a coherent story or plotting a novel were far from my mind, that they came later. In the beginning, there was just a need to speak out. I was obsessed with the need to express my homesickness and document the daily incidents of cultural difference that I was experiencing. I was anxious about the future of second-generation Sudanese and Muslim immigrants in the West, both from a personal and from a general perspective. I also started writing as a kind of defense. Suddenly I needed to express that life in Sudan was tolerable, that the people were good, that it was circumstances and not choice that had made us all leave. Here I was in a culture and place that asserted every minute that West was best, Africa a mess, only Islam oppresses women, and that I should be grateful I had escaped. Youth and pride made me resist this description. I had an intimate knowledge of both Sudan and Islam. They were in my blood, and I wanted to bear witness to what I knew, to put down on paper that the Khartoum I knew was a place where the impossible and the romantic pulsed within reach, a place that was easy and deep, harsh and vast, wayward and rich. I wanted to pinpoint exactly what I was missing. I wanted to show the people around me that an African city could be as atmospheric as London, livelier than Brighton, more beautiful than Edinburgh. Stories couldn't prove that, but it was enough for me to express that Sudan was a real place, its culture a valid way of life. I hope that my novels have enriched readers and given them new, different perspectives. And here are some of the examples of the kind of comments that I received from readers. This one is someone from the United States writing on Goodreads. You know the website Goodreads? You know it? Yeah. So he's making a comment on the kindness of enemies, and he says, "The story was great and totally worth the read for that alone. But my favorite part, as an otherwise WASP-P person, you know what WASP-P means? With capital W, capital A, capital S, capital P, which is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's what it means. So that's how he's describing himself. So he says, but my favorite part as an otherwise WASP-P person was how human and rational she made her Muslim characters. I have no idea what goes on in the day-to-day lives of Muslims. I'm an American atheist. Most of what I recognize as Islam, I get from popular media. Turbans, burqas, beards, explosions, guns, weeping as far as the eye can see. Aboulela crafted characters who weren't like that. They had substance. Her themes of humility and defiance were moving. So this is someone who really doesn't know, as he's saying, I don't really think he knows any Muslims, because he's really just judging Muslims from what he sees on the news, which he gets there. And then another reader from Aberdeen, which is the setting for my novel, The Translator, and this is someone who lived in Aberdeen all their lives. He said, "The Translator gave me a fresh perspective on the city I live in." A lady commenting on Lyrics Alley, also on Goodreads, she said, "I know so little about Sudanese and Egyptian culture. I wasn't sure I would connect with the lives of these very different characters, but I did. I love the story of a Sudanese family whose lives become intertwined with a woman who is Egyptian." And I've spoken about empathy between people of different cultures, but of course there's all kinds of empathy. There's empathy for the young, feeling empathy for the elderly. That's very important as well. People who are healthy and able-bodied, having empathy for someone who's disabled. Someone who is well off, having empathy for someone who is poor. And the other way around, of course, sometimes. Sometimes, if someone is poor, they might have a very rigid ideas about how the rich are, and of course, when they read about them, they can then have empathy about them. So this is from a young Sudanese girl commenting on Lyrics Alley, and she said, this is a book that would take you to Sudan and Omdurman 60 years back, because Lyrics Alley was set in the 1950s, and of course, as a young girl, she hasn't experienced the 1950s. So she said, this is a book that would take you to Sudan and Omdurman 60 years back, and how beautiful a time it was. And since it was based on a true story, I went searching for the poems and songs mentioned in the book, and I asked Baba about the streets, cafes, and places. So in this case, she's asking her father, about the places, and she's gaining empathy about how people lived in the past, how they were like us, and how they were different from us. So I'm sort of watching the time, and I'd just like to end a talk. I'd like to end my talk with a quote from Chinua Achebe, and it kind of sums up what I've been saying. And he says that he tells his students, it's not difficult to identify with someone like yourself, somebody next door who looks like you. What's more difficult is to identify with someone you don't see, who's very far away, who's a different color, who eats a different kind of food. When you begin to do that by reading, then literature is really performing its wonders. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very beautiful talk. We now have time for questions from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sofder. I would just like to ask you about, you mentioned about literary fiction and other genres such as science fiction and horror. Why do you think, in your opinion, that literary fiction in this century, it doesn't have as much as weight as it used to have? Like, it still does have some weight, but it's not really given a lot of attention. And the other genres such as science fiction, such as young adult novels, I'm not saying they're bad or anything, but they're getting more of the attention that literary fiction maybe deserves more. And my second question is, you mentioned about writing, you started writing more after you left Sudan, and maybe because you got more experiences and more things to write about. Do you think that someone who hasn't had that experience, couldn't travel or something, do you still think that makes him a good writer? Like he can still imagine himself in that setting and continue to write about these things from a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in my case personally, that I started to write after I moved, and I wasn't writing at a very young age. But other writers write since they are very young. They've been writing all their lives, and so they didn't need something to trigger it. I mean, in my case, it was the move that triggered the writing. But some people just naturally write. They keep diaries, for example. They're comfortable writing their thoughts. They write long letters. I wasn't like that, but some people are like that. So everybody is different. Every writer is different, and every writer is motivated by different things and propelled by different motives for writing. And of course, writing is also connected to reading. So people read different things. So and you're going to write what you read. It's almost like reading is the food, and then if you're going to produce, it. So there's infinite ways of writing and infinite reasons to write. You know, if you want to do it, you would do it. You would be driven to do it. Your first question was about the science fiction. Yeah. I think maybe it's not attention. You mean is sales. The sales of science fiction and these, of course, are much higher than the sales of literary fiction. Because they are just so easy to read. Because people are tired, you're working all day, and you're exhausted, and you want to read something which is effortless to read. So you want to pick up something, you know, that's easy to read. So you read horror, you read thrillers. There's an ease to reading them, or romance, and they're comforting. Also, there's no challenge to them. The problem with the challenges of literary fiction, and what I was talking about, is that it is going to make you uncomfortable while reading. You know, it's going to raise questions. It's going to challenge your way of thinking. And so that's not something that someone wants to do maybe after a hard day's work. You know, they want something comforting. And this comfort you don't get from the literary fiction. You get stimulation. You get, you're working your way through the text, and that's what makes it literary fiction, I think.
Hi, I'm Siraj Al-Matouri. I'm reporting for the Adam Center. Okay, so I'll start with two questions for you and one question for you, Ms. Al-Nasir. So I checked Goodreads. You mentioned Goodreads, and I checked your quotes on Goodreads. The second, third, and fourth quotes all show significances of Islam, of Prophet Muhammad and Allah. In a world where Islamophobia is increasing, and these continuous ways of hatred and discrimination, have you ever thought how that would affect your publicity, or how that might affect your readership? That's the first question. I'm talking about sales here, this part of the... And the second question is one quote that grabbed my attention. You mentioned that the enemy is what's irreversible and what's reached the farthest places. And then in the same quote, you mentioned that people who burn American flags or bomb buses with tourists, the real enemy is inside of them.
Yeah.
And I guess we're talking about Middle Easterns here.
We're talking about?
Middle Easterns? Mm-hmm. Okay, Middle Easterners. Are we saying, if you're saying that the enemy is irreversible, and we're in the same time we're saying that the enemy is inside of these people, are we saying that the case is hopeless and we can't really reverse it and the enemy will stay there forever because it's irreversible and it's reached the farthest place?
Okay, these are two quotes from the translator, and they're not in the same page or in the same...
but they're listed in the same quote as for Goodreads.
Yeah, because Goodreads people put quotes, but they don't take them in the same conversation. So in the first one, where the person is saying that the enemy is irreversible, it's reached the furthest places, he's talking about modernity. He's talking about modernity. Modernity has reached the furthest places. There's no going back. We can't really go back to a pre-modern age. We have technology now. Technology has reached everything. The high buildings have reached everywhere. We cannot go back to living as we did centuries ago. We cannot go back to riding horses and using swords and things like that. We cannot go back to that. Some people might have a nostalgia for that, but we cannot go back to that. So this is the first quote. The second one about the enemy is inside them, within them. Okay, this is meaning that they are themselves inside them. They are bitter and they are twisted and they have a twisted understanding and they are full of bitterness. And this is what is causing their action, which is these are the terrorists. He's talking about the terrorists in that second quote. So it's the two different quotes. Does that make sense? But it's not a hopeless situation. It's not meaning it's a hopeless situation, because the first one I'm talking about modernity. And yes, I think to fight modernity or to fight progress in a way is hopeless, because this is how the world is going. But then the second quote, which is saying that the enemy is within them, this is not it's not the same as the first quote.
So you're clearly talking about two kinds of enemies here.
I'm talking about two kinds.
Okay. My last thing is the culture of reading needs revitalization. What are the attempts or the actions of the department in reviving the culture of reading on campus?
Okay. One of the attempts is today's lecture. And I'll be happy to discuss this further after the lecture with you.
I'm sorry I haven't read any of your books, but I will do so now. After this lecture. I'd just like to ask you about the whole concept of empathy. How can we use our kind of literature? I mean, somebody like you, I write myself a little bit. And I've also thought a lot about the differences and appreciating and respecting differences. But how will we use literature to actually cut across the barriers and cross-cultural understanding? Like now, I think we need it more than ever because of what's happening in the Middle East and how we have been labeled Muslims. And it's not only because of terrorism per se, but I have experience in my work in development with agencies which always, just look at women in our part of the world as subjugated, etc. This whole concept of gender. Sometimes there's a lot of stereotyping going on. So how will we cut across all these barriers? How will literature, our kind of literature, when we try to compare, because we can look at the Western, we have read so much about the Western world, and we can empathize, and we know the realities. But how can we get the others across the ocean to see things in the same way and to understand that we are all human beings? There's a lot of universality in us all, and there are common denominators. And the suffering, we understand their suffering during the world wars or whatever kind of wars they had. But I just feel that it's only a minority who actually look at us with those kind of empathetic eyes. So I don't know really how we can, through writing, expose those realities and get more of understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, the writing is not the problem. The writing already exists. The writers are there. The books are written. They are there. The problem is reaching the people, reaching the readers. Through translation, it needs promotion. It needs active promotion from educational organization or from embassies, overseas embassies, that they would bring these writers from Egypt. Let's say they will take them on tour in the United States. They will put them in front of people, get them to talk to people, get the books in the hands of people there. This requires a lot of finance and effort, and that's what is needed. The British Council promotes literature all over the world. The Goethe Institute. We don't have what is the equivalent of that? Where is the Arabian Goethe Institute, which is promoting Arab culture in the West, or even in Asia, in Indonesia? People would love to read Arab writers. They would love to learn Arabic in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, but yet there is no Arab center for them to go to, And so the work it's not, the writers are writing, the material is there already. It's a matter of promoting it and getting it into the syllabus. So which is why educators are so important. They play such a valuable role. Chinua Achille's novel Things Fall Apart is part of the U.S. college syllabus, and millions of people have read it, because it's being taught in the schools. So these books need to be taught in the schools. We need Najib Mahfouz to be taught in U.S. schools and British schools, even if it's a short story. It will make a huge difference.
Hi, I'm again. I first want to say I was very touched by, in the beginning of what you mentioned, when you began to give a narrative account of growing up in Sudan and also seeing your position of privilege and describing, how you saw your position of privilege related to the Black population and the divide that caused the divorce that you mentioned. My first introduction, I guess, into your region of the world was when I began introduced to another writer who's from your region of the world named Alwaleed. And what connected me into Sudan and Egypt was the fact that because she was adopted by Black American family, and I am Black American, part Native. And so it made me want to, she credits us with our culture with saving her life because she had to flee. Her father was a famous archaeologist who was murdered him. She remember her father, who was Egyptian, white Arab Egyptian, and her mother, who was Somali or Oromo, being murdered because her father, who was an Arab Egyptian man, who was fighting against slavery in Sudan and fighting against the murder that was going on against the Aswan Dam. And so that introduced me into this region of the world. My question is, since we're talking about, as the world is getting smaller, we're talking about talking with each other and getting rid of stereotypes. I can say, living here, I've been here, working here, and studying here for over 6 years, I've experienced a lot of racism and sexism myself as a Black American woman. People who don't know the culture of my people, who automatically label me as being a prostitute or a maid or a slave and so forth. And I guess what I want to see is that as we're discussing and we're talking about Islamophobia, we're talking about things that are happening, and it connects me back to what you mentioned before about when you went to Scotland and you began to see, oh wow, now I'm not in a position of privilege anymore. In the world of literature, of Arabism literature, what is being done to address this issue of racism within this region of the world, racism and sexism, and how women, writers of this region of the world, are connecting with women of the United States and Canada and the UK to merge this together. Because I think what helped me with the other writers that she began to talk about how, even though she was half Sudanese, half Egyptian, that she started reading about Alice Walker, from my particular talk was in search of her mother's gardens and how she was able to give a certain keen eye to my particular culture while also bringing it back to what was going on here. So I guess if I could pose a question, what is the conversation, or if you know of any conversations of other women writers from Sudan, South Sudan, Egypt, or whatnot, who are coming together to create characters in their literature that address this issue and how they're using it to build further connections. Thank you.
I think a lot of the young writers who are writing now are, they are concerned with these issues. I mean, you'll find a lot of the new writers, new upcoming writers, that this idea of identities is one of the issues that features in Arabic writers, Arabic writing at the time. It's going on now. And if it's not there already, then I think it will come sooner or later, these things that you were saying. They will come. And of course, sometimes writers hold a mirror to society, and sometimes the majority don't want to see that. They're in denial. They don't want to be told that, we have this problem or that problem. And so sometimes it's not really a welcome image. But part of what literature does is that it speaks about things that it's not really possible to speak about in day-to-day life. It holds a mirror to society.
So we talked about how there's lack of harmony and empathy between people with different cultures, but I think now we see a lot of lack of empathy and harmony within people of the same culture. The people from the same country or the same religion, we see a lot of fighting between, for example, Salafis and Sufis and other people with the same culture. How is this represented or not represented in literature?
Well, they're not from the same culture then, because they are obviously having a very different, way of interpreting their religion and leading their lives. So in a way, they are, even though they might look as if they're a subculture, and let's say they're from different subcultures. And again, it would help then if you read a fictionalized account of someone from that subculture, then you can see how they view the world, how they see it differently. You might not agree with them, and you might never agree with them. This is not about agreement. I mean, empathy is not about convincing the other person of your point of view or agreeing with them. You can continue. You can be confident in your own position forever. But what changes is an understanding of where this person is coming from. I mean, why are they holding these beliefs? What are they getting out of it? You know, just a simple understanding, and that's really all that it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, fine. I have a technical question unlike the other questions, kind of for my own benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but English was your second language when you moved to the UK, right? So, didn't you ever feel intimidated when you're writing that your English level will not be up to the standards of English-speaking natives? Because I personally love writing, and given my educational background, I feel like my Arabic is really weak and my English can't be confident enough to pursue what I like to do in writing. So how did you overcome something like that?
Well, my English was always was stronger than my Arabic because of education, but also it's to do with reading. It's very closely connected to reading. It's just I read, and I read a lot in English, and it's the reading that gives you the language skills. You know, it's actually immersing yourself in good writing, and then after a while you know what good writing is. You can tell the difference. You know, I can tell now straight away. I can read a paragraph and I can tell this is good writing or this is not good writing, and that's because of the years and years of practice. You know, if you get a journal, for example, called Granta publishes very high quality writing, and that's the sort of writing that you need to be reading, and you need to never read bad writing. You have to not wean yourself, forbid yourself from reading bad writing, and so that's how it works that way. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to ask you, what was the aim of you beginning writing? I mean, is it something inside you and you want to get it out, or there is an aim for something you want to say, or and did fame change anything in yourself inside and your character? Because you're my relative and I know you.
No, I'm not famous. There'll always be someone more famous than me. You know, there'll always be someone more famous, someone selling more books, someone, there's always like that. So
the aim of writing.
No, the aim of writing, I wanted to at first it was very personal, that I just wanted to relieve the pressure, that I had with it. And there was no I was in a situation where people around, immigrants don't want to sit and talk about these problems at all. They're in deep denial. When immigrants get together, they want to pretend that they're back home. They talk their old language, they drink tea, they socialize. They're in deep denial. There's just no interest in discussing children's future, the problems they're going to have, whatever, nothing like that. So to me, it was the only way I could do it, to get it out. And then when I went to creative writing classes and people encouraged me, then I started to see it as a possible profession, as a possible career. And that's when I started to take it more seriously.
Not just a hobby.
Not just a hobby, yeah, but for a long time it was a hobby.
I wanted to ask a question with regards to Islamophobia in literature, because I was actually on Twitter and there was this one American young man who was trying to convince me that he knew more about Islam than I did, because he had read falsely translated verses from the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
And when I sat down and instead of attacking him because he was essentially assaulting me verbally and telling me that I know nothing and I'm repressed and I'm weak and I'm lying, etc., 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 I wrote him a passage in which I explained to him different ways in which I saw the mercy and beauty of Islam, especially towards me as a woman, especially with regards to how my mother treated me and how people in my family treated me because I'm a woman, and how Islam elevated me as a woman. And through reading that one passage, he never got back to me, but I never saw an Islamophobic post on his Twitter feed again. And I feel like the problem is that you have so many pretentious people who think that they know so much, when with literature we have to convey to them that they know so little. So my question is, how do we get it across to especially the West that you actually know nothing? Because at the end of the day, we know nothing about foreign literature. We know nothing about foreign culture. we learn through reading, and then if I say, oh, I know all about Americans, all they like is McDonald's, that's kind of defeating the point of empathy. So how can we work towards a better future with that?
Well, I think already there's a lot of work is being done, and already a lot of people do know more. I mean, things are much better than they were in that respect than they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And you know about the West. I mean, you're speaking English perfectly now. You wrote this passage on the Twitter, so you do know, and you do know that you do read, and you do know you know that the West isn't all just one thing. You know, there's differences. There's this, there's that, there's this, there's that, and this is what this is what we're trying as well to get people to realize, that it's not all one thing. You know. That there are women like you and me, but there are oppressed women as well. So it's not a sometimes also when there's the confrontation becomes so very much black and white, but it isn't really black and white, because there's no smoke without fire. Some of the things that are being said about us that hurt us don't apply to us personally, but they are still there in society. And the same goes for the West as well. So there's patches of this and patches of that. And the important thing is to get a more complex view of the situation, and a more nuanced view, so that we realize that there is, not one single, story or one single image of the West and one single image of the East.
Thank you very much. We'll have a book signing for a couple of minutes, and thank you very much.